Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's me, the Lou D. Oh! Double G, and guess what? Today, we're talking about Captain America Brave New World, but it's not a review. I'm going to say my thoughts about the movie. However, it's not a review, it's more like a discussion about other reviews and why I think some of them are right and some of them are wrong. I just think it's far more interesting to talk about the kind of divide with this film rather than just talking about my thoughts only. I think it's very interesting. Also, it coming off like the heels of Anthony Mackie's like controversy is also interesting to kind of take into account here and see what people are thinking and feeling. But let's get right into it. So the first review I want to talk about is one from Rotten Tomatoes. So we're gonna go over like holistic reviews really quickly, and then say like one thing from it that I find interesting. Uh, so the first one is the tomato meter from Rotten Tomatoes is a 49%. So it's definitely stinky according to the media, the critics here. But the audience gives it an 80%, which is super interesting that they're divided so much. It's not unlikely that that happens, right? But it's still interesting to kind of see that unfold. So the critics' consensus here on Rotten Tomatoes is Anthony Mackie capably takes up Cap's mantle and shield, but Brave New World is too routine and overstuffed with uninteresting Easter eggs to feel like a worthy standalone adventure for this new Avengers leader. I think that that is an interesting thought. And it's me like being kind of nice, right? Quite frankly, I think that the first part is correct. I agree with that. Anthony Mackie does a great job in having his version of Cap, bringing it to life. I fully believe that this person can figure out a way to beat Red Hulk. Like watching the film, that's how I feel. As a comic book reader, I don't think that it's uninteresting. Some of the Easter eggs, the Secret Wars and Easter eggs and things like that. I think that that is what Marvel is known for. Overstuffed, I don't really know. Some things definitely went over my head, despite the fact that I am an avid comic book reader and I didn't catch certain things. However, I could see how if somebody's actively like paying all of the attention and is deeper than I am, how they might be uninteresting. Regardless, that is kind of what Marvel is known for, and so if they're doing that, I feel like we kind of put that in their wheelhouse to do, right? But yeah. But to say all the Easter eggs make it not a worthy standalone is I don't know. It's a huge thing to kind of accuse here. I think that the Easter eggs help us understand what's to come, especially for those who don't read the comic books or who aren't as interested. I don't know. Let me know what y'all think about that part. And I'm very interested to see how Sam becomes the leader of the Avengers, right? We saw that great moment in Avengers where Captain America starts barking orders to everybody while they're in New York. I want to see how he progresses and gets to that point because he's like almost there, but he's not quite there. You know what I mean? But 49% seems egregiously stupid to me. Like that is not at all correct in my opinion. One of the critics here, I won't name names, says it feels as if Sam is merely the guest star in someone else's story in this particular chapter of the MCU's interwoven narrative. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Watching the film, I think that he is it's meant to show that he's part of a bigger world, right? That it's not just about him. That there are things in here that are out of his control that he's trying his best to tamper. You know what I'm saying? Like bring those expectations up, and he's kind of dealing with a lot of that there. I think that that is more prevalent in something like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where he is definitely it does feel a little more like that because quite frankly it kind of is because he's not Captain America from the beginning there. But in this movie, I 100% think that he is the main guy, and everybody calling him Cap and not stuttering when they say it, everybody respecting him, everybody in the film understanding that he has a huge role to play here is super important and obvious to me. The next one I'm going to go over here is on IMDb. And I feel like the stars aligned a little bit more here for the media score being a 42, and then the IMDb user rating is 6.1. 6.1 is a lot lower than I would have even been like that's acceptable in my opinion. I'm more in like the 7 range, but we'll talk about my thoughts a little bit later. So a lot of the critics here seem to be around the 50-55 range, and they're one of the ones I want to kind of talk about a little bit is interesting. So it says it's surprising how much you miss the star power of the original Avengers bunch. Or maybe it's not surprising. Whatever the case, watching this movie too often feels like you suspect there's a better party going on next door, but you can't get in. Wow. I'd also like to take a second and just kind of remind everybody that a lot of actors at the beginning weren't big stars until their Marvel castings, right? That can't be said for somebody like Robert Downey Jr., but it can absolutely be said for other actors, right? And so when you take that into consideration, you kind of understand that, like, that's kind of what they're trying to do here. You know, kind of what they did back then. I understand that Chris Evans was a bigger actor back then than others. However, with the new Falcon, with, you know, I say new, but he's been around, right? I think that's exactly what they're trying to do. You know, people tend to be upset, and I say this being on like Twitter and Instagram and things like that, Facebook, and seeing that some people are like, well, they're just not big enough actors. But also, these are the same people who are upset if a big actor is cast in a role that could be going to somebody else to build them up. You know, I think Harrison Ford is a perfect example of this and how they fumbled the bag a little bit there, and they could have cast somebody else to be Thunderbolt Ross. Not going to get into it at this moment, but that's just kind of how I feel about that. But it's so weird. It's like you can't have both, right? You can't have the new and up and coming actors to explode with Marvel, and you also can't have the like big super big actors come in and do it, because then people just get upset about that as well. That whole thing is just ridiculous to me, to kind of think that the star power is the issue here. We have plenty of star power. We have Harrison Ford, first of all. Once again, I have my problems with that casting, but we have him. We have Luis Esposito. That's how you say his name. I can't quite remember right now. Anthony Mackie, who himself has earned his right to be a star at this point. The list goes on. I'm not going to spoil too much, but I just think that that's ridiculous to say. Been focusing on the negatives here. Let's talk about one that I agree with. So this is 75, excuse me, out of 100, which I think this is a very fair ranking. Brave New World drags in places, losing momentum thanks to the plot's inability to build up any real suspense over what's going on. 100% agree with that. It's really hard to see some of the stakes there at times, whereas in The Winter Soldier, it felt like nothing but stakes. Nice, juicy, medium rare steaks. However, much of the action features nice, clean direction, while the humor is sparse, separating the supporting cast. Danny Ramirez and Shira Haas get some fun moments. I agree. I think Danny Ramirez did a really good job. I think he is a different kind of Falcon than Sam Wilson, and I'm excited to see kind of where it goes. Where Sam Wilson was a little more serious, he isn't. So I'm excited to see where that goes, but I absolutely agree with a lot of that. Moving on to the next one. This is comicbook.com's rating. They rated it a 3.5 out of 5. I think that that's fine if you're going for like the 5 ranking, I suppose. I may have gone 3.75. But talking about Esposito's character, Sidewinder, they said something here that I absolutely agree with. Speaking of weaknesses, much like the themes of the film itself, Esposito's Sidewinder feels more like a means to an end rather than an antagonist who stands on his own 2 feet. He feels very much along the same vein as Ulysses Claw in Black Panther. Great casting, great actor. Had too little time on the screen for me to care as much as I would have liked to, you know? Obviously a larger character in the comic books, but it just felt kind of thrown in there at last second to kind of maybe bridge some gaps that they noticed were there on the cutting room floor when they were editing. It felt a little out of place, but I totally agree with that. Something I don't agree with is their interpretation of Harrison Ford's Thaddeus Ross here. They say, played previously by the the late William Hurt, and while Ford is clearly in a league of his own in the acting department, Hurt's performance is nothing to sneeze at. Luckily, Ford is given plenty to work with here, running the emotional gamut of attempting to cement his legacy in a newly elected president while trying to mend bridges with his daughter, Betty. He brings layers to Thaddeus as a man who is struggling with his actions as general, president, and father, and Ford captures the torture in all of his past mistakes. I thought that the look of him and all of I don't agree that he did well. Frankly, I think that there wasn't enough to him. I feel like we were missing that presence that we had prior to this movie. Civil War is a great example of that. The Incredible Hulk is another great example of that. He felt too old to play this role, in my opinion. I think that this should have been a younger actor to play this role, and I mean like 20 years maybe. Like, and I'm not going to say Harrison Ford is a terrible actor because that's just not true. However, I don't think this was the role for him, personally. I think we should have gone in another direction. It felt like I was feeling him being in this role just left me feel like he was too old. That we just needed somebody else who was a bit younger to be Thunderbolt Ross, essentially. The presence just wasn't there for me, and it's not out of the wheelhouse to cast somebody who's super old to be president, because lately that's just all we've been getting in real life, but like, Thunderbolt Ross is definitely a different story, but of course, my opinion. The next one we're going to talk about, and is by far the one I disagree with the most, is IGN's rating of 5 out of 10, and this is what they said. Captain America Brave New World feels neither brave nor all that new, falling short of strong performances from Anthony Mackie, Harrison Ford, and Carl Lumbly. I'm glad they mentioned Carl Lumbly, because I did not like the way the leader looked at all. Like, he looked decrepit, and he looked too close to a Last of Us zombie, in my opinion, and not like the leader, I kind of equated something similar as MODOK in Ant-Man Quantumania, where it was like we just missed the mark there completely. Like, it was just nowhere near what it was supposed to be. If you look at side-by-side comparison to MODOK and even the leader in comics and the movie, they just fall super duper short. Acting wise, there's not a whole lot written for him in that regard, so I don't blame him for that in particular. However, the only part of this I agree with, and I said before, is Harrison Ford. Not the acting there just wasn't for me. The presence wasn't there. All of that, which I already said. I think that the film hammers away the whole how adamantium is going to change the world, and how it is a new world, and how you have to be brave to get into it, because they talk and drive home this notion that there's a race to get the adamantium across all countries, right? And that's just something that the film does a great job of explaining. I just don't think that is an accurate representation of what really happens. In addition to that, we're just moving into a new era of Marvel that they themselves are also trying to figure out. So, like, all in all, 5 out of 10 is a terrible review. And also, IGN isn't really known for their reviews. I think they gave Black Widow a 9 out of 10 at one point, like She-Hulk a 9 out of 10, which I just don't agree with either one of those wholeheartedly. Like, not even close. Like, I know this stuff is left to interpretation, but it's just absolutely incorrect in my opinion. So the last thing I want to talk about before I get into my own thoughts and opinions are some of the controversies around Anthony Mackie. So there was if you're not aware, a con in Spain or some other country, European country, I believe, where he talks about taking the America out of Captain America when acting as Captain America. At face value, that absolutely sounds like a bad interpretation of the character, being that the name is literally in there. However, I think that people who were upset about this, when rightfully so, especially if you don't understand or if you don't read the comics or whatever, you're gonna be like, well, what the hell's the point of this then, right? He's supposed to be so epically patriotic that I want to screech like an eagle at the top of my lungs every time he talks. I think the point that he was trying to drive home, and I think in some ways hurt the film a little bit, is that while Captain America is based in America, and that is his home, and that is what he is trying to protect, I think he was trying to drive home the notion that Captain America is what is the ideal that the country itself should strive to be, right? Always honorable, always doing the right thing, always fighting for the little guy, right? Like all of those things, and it just came out kind of wrong. And I ultimately do think that hurt the film. While he's not incorrect, if you read the comics, if you have at all read any story arc of Captain America, and even the movies, that is something that they try to drive home. They literally do this in Captain America: Civil War, right? He's literally in prison for years because of Thunderbolt Ross, because he went against America, right? So all of that in consideration, people are just going to take the negatives from those comments, right? And be like, unpatriotic, he shouldn't be playing Captain America, he's stupid, I'm not watching this movie. I do think that this has been showcased even in Chris Evans's Captain America, as previously mentioned, with Civil War specifically, and even going back to the comic books, right? Like the Civil War comic book line has so many instances of this, in addition to even the Winter Soldier, right? I understand that Hydra took over Shield, right? But regardless, he still went against America in this way because he was trying to do the right thing. And I think that is exactly what is happening here with Captain America, Sam Wilson, going against the president, still doing what he thinks is right. So all of those things have never exactly been not a part of him. So my thoughts on that. My final thoughts on this movie is it is not anywhere near a perfect film. I mean, when you put it up against the Winter Soldier, Civil War, even the first Captain America, it doesn't touch those films with a 10-yard stick. Those films are absolutely amazing, and the Winter Soldier really did change the course of the MCU when it came out. Not only literally, but just in production, right? Moving from Joss Whedon to the Russo brothers because of their success with the Winter Soldier, I mean, speaks volumes to how great that film is. Regardless, Captain America: Brave New World tried to do something like that and kind of failed. I don't know exactly what the situation is not hiring the Russo brothers for this. Are they only doing Avengers movies now? I kind of wish they had directed this. I understand why they have a black director. I totally get that. But this movie falls a little short as far as doing what the Winter Soldier did. Again, it is not a bad movie by any means, in my opinion. I think that it is a perfectly good movie. Like I said before, 7.5 out of 10, 3.75 out of 5. Like, it is passing. And most of it is being saved by the action-packed sequences and Anthony Mackie himself. Those are really two big saving graces for this film, because I love Anthony Mackie as Captain America, and I love the fight between him and Red Hulk. Like, I really, really enjoyed that. I felt like it was right out of a comic book, you know? The story's a little muddy. They kind of save themselves a little bit here and there. And I didn't like Harrison Ford as Thunderbolt Ross. I've already talked about that. I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but I really didn't. Everything else is good. Everything else I had a lot of fun with. And an honorable mention I will say about this film that wasn't so successful were the VFX. The CGI, the green screen stuff, it's super obvious to me that they're using these things, and the lighting was off in some scenes, especially there's a scene at the end after Captain America beats Red Hulk, spoiler alert, where he's standing next to some asphalt, and the lighting on him looks different than the asphalt. It's just super, super, super obvious that this was shot in front of a green screen, which is fine because I'm aware that that is what they need to do in order to save money, whatever. Like, if that's what they're gonna do, that's what they're gonna do. But to that point, there are plenty of films that do that where it doesn't look like that. So I know that it's possible, and especially with a Captain America film, you would think that there would be money and time put into this to ensure that it looks the way it needs to. I don't know. Maybe that just got missed. I do think that certain things can be forgiven, but it just happens a lot in this film that I think it's way too obvious. So anyways, let me know what y'all think. I'm excited to read the comments or see other videos and see how other people thinking about this movie. But yeah, if you like this sort of discussion review rather than the normal reviews, please let me know if you like it, and I'll keep doing these. Bye.